I love this show. I get to check my email and play spelling bee while I shoot the show.
Good spam?
No, just like Google Alert. I mean, like Google Calendar stuff.
Maybe we'll use my computer next time.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. I am in my home kitchen, and today I am doing something new. We are starting a little mini-series called Claire-ified. That name has been kicking around for quite a while. And it's really a chance for me to connect with subscribers, answer some of your questions, and also it is a lot less, sorry.
Wait for the peeing sound.
Sorry, my dishwasher's on. Actually, the name Claire-ified was coined by Mrs. Sormos, my 7th grade science teacher, because I asked a lot of questions in class. So I've had that one in the back pocket for a while. But Claire-ified is a chance to connect more with subscribers, answer some of your questions, engage a little bit more with folks at home who are baking, maybe have baking questions. So today I'm answering very specifically your burning baking questions that you submitted.
Just wanted you to know I'd like to ask a question. Something's bugging me, been on my mind. Sure be great if you clarify.
Oh my God, I'm really excited to talk about these. Okay, so this is a great opportunity for me because one of the things I'm most passionate about is helping people become better bakers at home, helping them to feel empowered to try something and learn something new that they haven't done before and something that felt intimidating, because through baking, I've learned what a powerful process it can be to approach a challenge and try to tackle something that feels really hard and intimidating, and then to sort of overcome that feeling and eventually reach success. And it's kind of like a lesson for life, not just for baking. So answering these questions, I hope to get people sort of one step closer to that. So I love this. The first question says, for someone moving out from home soon, what baking/cooking supplies do you recommend for a college student on a budget? Great question. I was going to be like, well, wasn't that long ago that I was in that position? It maybe was that long ago, although I don't like to think about that. This is like a great tip that I wish more people knew about. I would say really check out a restaurant supply store rather than buying things from like a retail place or a designated kitchen store, because I find them to be very expensive, and you can find great quality, really durable equipment at a restaurant supply website or like physical brick and mortar store. So if you're already a cook or a baker, I think it's about like walking around the store or browsing the website and thinking like, have I used that tool in the last year? So that's what I would recommend doing, is like finding an affordable place where you can get a bunch of stuff all at once, and then you add on as you need. Thank you, Emma, for your question. I wish you good luck in building your home kitchen. All right, Laura writes, when developing a sourdough starter, at what point do you quote unquote call it and start over? Do you have any tips? This is a really good question. I have found that sourdough starter is extremely resilient. So I would call it at the point at which you see like mold or off smells in your starter. But barring that, you can keep it going. So it might not be the healthiest starter. You might have to do several feedings at room temperature, might have to sort of nurse it back to health. But if it's a situation where you've left your starter and you've just neglected it in the fridge for weeks and possibly even months, it's probably still fine. I mean, it's not in good shape. You have to still kind of rehab it and get it back into a place where it's active and it's healthy. That just means like feeding it a bunch of times, but you can almost always bring a starter back. I hope that helped. All right, so Essence writes, can you talk about egg substitutes, like when to use flax egg, mashed banana, yogurt, etc., and what can and can't be made without eggs? I can offer some insight into this, but generally speaking, like I haven't made like tons of forays into gluten-free or vegan baking rather. So I would say generally speaking, like in a recipe where eggs are providing binding but not a lot of structure, that's when you can substitute a flax egg. So things like a brownie recipe, or in some cases cookie dough. Where you can't use it is in a recipe where the egg is giving structure. So like a flourless chocolate cake where you're also like whipping the egg whites. That's sort of an instance where it's not a successful substitute. But I would also just point you toward more vegan baking resources. There's the website Canale-ified. It's like tons of resources on vegan and gluten-free baking with lots of helpful tips about chickpeas or the cooking liquid from chickpeas, where there's like tons of resources about this. It's just not so much like my area of expertise. Says, Claire, I love your recipes from Dessert Person. I have your book. Thank you, Sarah, for buying the book. There are lots of great looking foods with nuts and I'm allergic. What do you recommend as substitutions that won't take away from the dish? Like your sticky walnut buns, the addition of almond flour in some pies, etc. I want to be able to have that extra flavor. Okay, great question. I'm sure like not the only person to have this issue. There are a lot of nuts in Dessert Person. The sweet tart dough in Dessert Person is a good example. It has a little bit of almond flour and it's toasted and it's added in. It's really just there for flavor and texture. You could just replace that with flour and the recipe will work perfectly fine. So in terms of other recipes where the nut is really essential to the flavor and the texture of the dish, like the sticky walnut buns, you could substitute for other kinds of seeds. So you could do like a sesame seed, which is like, I imagine like a separate allergy. Some people are allergic to sesame, but it's a separate thing. Sunflower seeds is another really good one. You could also try dried fruit of some kind. That's going to contribute its own sweetness and obviously like a little acid. But I could see dried fruit working really well in a application where maybe there were nuts and you're just kind of swapping them one for the other. Okay, so the next question from someone named Shade. Theoretical question. If you could cook anything with Julia Child, what would you want to cook with her? Such a good question. One I've thought about a lot. I've seen, she's like probably one of a few, but egg episodes of The French Chef where she makes a French omelet, and I find her like hand motions really fascinating, and she's obviously like quite adept at moving around the kitchen and handling cookware and utensils and everything. So something like super, super technique based that I would want to see. I think an omelet is like a great example. And hers cooks in like 15 seconds. It's crazy. But then I would maybe also like something like a coq au vin or like beef bourguignon, a long, almost like I wouldn't want to cook a really fast, quick thing and then a really long simmered, braisey kind of thing, which I'm sure would be delicious. So Carrie writes, what's the difference between instant yeast and active dry yeast? Are they interchangeable? Generally speaking, there isn't a significant difference between these two. Active dry yeast has a coating around the granules that you have to dissolve. I can't remember if it's you use less instant yeast than active dry or the opposite. So it's not quite a one-to-one, but generally speaking, you can swap them in a recipe. So you can just do a quick search on the internet for like, what ratio, of active dry to instant should I use? But just as a FYI, instant yeast is not the same thing as like rapid rise yeast. So don't make that mistake, but yes, you can substitute basically in any recipe that uses active dry, you can sub in instant yeast as long as you follow the proportion. All right, thank you, Carrie. So Lisa's question is the following. High altitude baking stumps me. I can already tell you I can't answer this question. I have no idea about altitude baking, but I'll read it anyway.
There's like 30 questions regarding
Oh God, I don't know. I've never done it. I've never done baking at altitudes, but I'll just, for the sake of it, I'll read the question. It says, some recipes really need the adjustment, some don't. How should we decide whether to change the recipe or keep it the same? Lisa, I don't know. I think it's a good opportunity for me to be like, I'm gonna look into this and try to figure it out, because I really have no idea. Nostalgia Trip writes, when developing a recipe, is there a golden rule for the ratio of ingredients? I want to develop cakes, but have no idea how to make a recipe. Nostalgia Trip, it's like you're in my brain, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I'm working on new recipes for a future book, and I am in the cakes chapter, and man, is it giving me some trouble. So there are set ratios for cakes. There is something called a high ratio cake, which is a cake that has like a high proportion of sugar in it, and there are very specific ratios for a high ratio cake. And you can easily look them up, like I don't remember what they are. But when I am developing a recipe, I'm not really like looking at that. Generally, I'm going off of a recipe that I know and have made before, and like I know that this works. And then I'm tweaking it, I'm using it as a reference, I'm comparing. So I'm not like always looking at the ratios. The ratios for me are more of a tool when something isn't working. I can go to that and look. So yes, there's definitely these kind of set ratios that will tell you, will your cake rise properly? Will it be the right texture? Will it be moist and not dry? All these things. So yes, and I would just do a quick search for like high ratio cake proportions. Okay, the next question is from May. The question is there anything you've tried baking but can never get 100% right? My own answer, everything, LOL, I can't bake at all. yes, there's things. I'm trying to think if I've had like a really persistent trouble. There's a lot of stuff where I feel like I'm not totally nailing it.
What about meringue cookies?
Rude. They were just fine. Sourdough is a good example. It's like I'm never really getting it 100%. What can frustrate me about a recipe is like maybe I'll really nail it one time and then the next time I make it, it's different and it's maybe not as good or something, and then I get really frustrated because it's like, why is this turning out different than the last time? I don't know, sometimes I get really tripped up by this super easy stuff too, which is very frustrating. All right, How to Run Away says, hi Claire, I tried making a few recipes from Dessert Person and everything has been delicious so far. Great. But as someone who is fairly new to baking, my execution often misses the mark slightly. I made your brioche dough and it turned out a little too crusty. I made your forever brownies and they were a little too dense, etc. How can an amateur baker identify what's wrong and fix it for next time? This is such a great question. And I also really I feel like there's an applied attitude here of openness to trying new things and wanting to improve when it's doesn't quite reach the expectation, which I totally understand and kind of just talked about. So I just want to say thank you for trying those things. As an amateur, you're trying to learn more. I think that's great. I would say YouTube is a great tool. Watch tons of videos. I Google stuff all the time about problems that I have in my baked goods, like why did my cake sink, that kind of thing. So I think baking forums are super, super helpful. They're easy to find just through a simple search. You can literally type a question that you have about your baked good, like why are my brownies dense? And it'll come up with all these threads. You can read through them. I find them so helpful. You get a bunch of different explanations. People who've tried to fix it and have been successful, and they'll say sort of what worked for them. That's a really great tool. And then other than that, I think it's a lot about developing muscle memory. For me, it's like I've done things so many times. I think physically preparing them, I go into sort of I go through the motions that are familiar to me, and I maybe lose track of little, little tricks that I do or little motions that are really important, and it's just hard for me to even realize that I'm doing them. And these are just things that are developed over time that you do as you get better. So I just think practice is a huge part of it, and then sort of having this intrepid curiosity to try to diagnose the problem as you go along. I mean, sometimes the answer is that your oven or your pan, that's sometimes I tell people it really might not be your fault that these things happened. There's just so many variables, and I think really the best way to learn is to try again. That was long. Could be that are you at altitude? Possibly. Addie writes, my frosting keeps falling off the sides of my cakes when the cakes are fully cooled. Why is that happening? So you have fully cooled cakes and the frosting slides off. It might be that your cakes aren't warm, but your frosting itself could be warm. Maybe you're working in a warm kitchen, and so the butter and the frosting, I assume it's a butter-based frosting, is warm, and so the consistency is just looser than it should be. So try chilling your frosting, and every 5 or 10 minutes, pull it out of the fridge, beat it with a whisk or a spatula to sort of even out the temperature, and working with a stiffer frosting. If the cake isn't the problem, it might just be the frosting itself, and you're in just a warm environment, and the frosting is just loose and is not acting as the spackle that it should be. It's funny that you asked this because I just yesterday had to frost a cake in my bedroom in front of the AC. So believe me, I've been there. This question is, how to use salt European edition. It says, we only have very coarse sea salt and very fine table salt over here. We don't have kosher or Morton salt, and the volume measurements are driving me to despair. Oh no, that's not good. Making me usually just guess the amount of salt in recipes that use volume measurements for salt. Could you help with this? See if you can find a basic cake recipe that calls for a certain amount of the kind of salt that you have available near you. And then just basically use that as a rule of thumb when you're baking. The good thing about the salt in a baking recipe is that you are not creating something salty. You are not doing much more than just gently bringing out the flavor of the other ingredients. So if you're really off on your salt quantities in a baking recipe, it's not going to make a huge functional difference. If you only have coarse sea salt, try to grind it up. If you need to, you can smash it in a bag and to get it a little bit finer, and then just try using that. If you can't find a reliable amount to use as a benchmark in another kind of recipe, sort of written locally. Darcy writes, when making a creme brulee, what should the consistency be and how do you tell when it is done? Also, does it need to be chilled before serving? When it's in the oven and you're testing it, give the pan, or even just the rack itself, like a little shake, not too much because you have to bake it in a water bath and you don't want to splash the water around. But you want to agitate it ever so slightly and look for what I call a wobble, but not a ripple, if that makes sense. So this is something that I think about in my head all the time. Think about the scene in Jurassic Park with a cup of water on the dashboard in the Jeep and the T-Rex, like making it ripple. Or like I guess maybe a less specific example is like throw a stone in a pond and then the water ripples. So if it ripples, you have liquid. If it wobbles, where like you have a sort of larger amount of the mixture moving more slowly but still moving, that's a wobble. So you want to pull it when it's wobbling in the center. The edges will be set. So that's what you're looking for, a wobble, not a ripple. And then yes, you want to chill it before it's served, because if you were to apply a blowtorch to a room temperature creme brulee to caramelize the sugar, you will melt the custard underneath. So it needs to be chilled to withstand that really intense heat from the blowtorch to create the glassy caramelized sugar coating. So yes to being chilled. It's either Jenny or Jean. I'm gonna go with Jenny. Jenny writes, generally, when am I allowed to decrease the amount of sugar/sweetener without affecting the end product structurally? Such a good question. One that I'm constantly thinking about and like recalibrating based on my recipe tests. So generally in a cake recipe, you could probably successfully slash it 10 to 15% without really adversely affecting the flavor or texture, but particularly in cake making, sugar is so important to every aspect of the cake. The thing is about sugar is that it's making something moist, and so the more that you cut it, you'll probably get something that's a lot drier and more crumbly, which you don't really want.
So your answer is no.
The answer is like you don't really want to cut it too much, unless for whatever reason you have a recipe that's just like super sweet, and you know, like let's say you have like a chocolate mousse or something and it's super, super sweet. You can cut that sugar by half because like the sugar is not doing, the only thing the sugar is really doing in that case is adding sweetness. Megan asks, what's your hot take on when to use baking powder versus baking soda? I've seen them used interchangeably and sometimes both in the same recipe. What up with that? There's not a super quick answer to this. There is sort of a general, I'll tell you the general concept behind it. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. So if you, like children in the United States do the like vinegar, baking soda, food coloring thing when they make a volcano, you know from experience that baking soda interacts with an acid and produces CO2. It produces gas, it bubbles, and that is what is leavening a cake. Now, baking powder, on the other hand, is sodium bicarbonate with an acid already incorporated in. Basically, the rule of thumb is that you use baking soda in a recipe where the batter, the preparation, whatever it is, has an acidic ingredient so that it already has the like agent that will react with the soda to produce the gas. And baking powder you add to a more neutral batter, preparation, whatever, so that it has its own sort of self-contained reaction. Kind of like a quick and dirty rundown of the differences and why one is used and not the other. I would say in most cases you're gonna see baking powder because of that double acting effect that it has. And in most cases you're gonna see soda as like a booster to the powder or as a means of neutralizing the acid in the recipe. Aurora asks, what's the difference between room temperature butter versus melted in batter and dough? Would you use one instead of the other? And could you use room temp when a recipe calls for melted? So, excellent question with a very concrete answer. So, generally speaking, room temperature butter is desired when you are going for a light, cakey texture in the end result, like a butter cake, that kind of thing. And that is because often you'll have the recipe start with a step called creaming, where you are working the butter and the sugar together. And room temperature butter has sort of a unique property in that it is capable of being whipped. It can like hold on to air. And when you're creaming, you are working these sharp little sugar crystals into this butter, and it's creating, like, it's scraping itself in and creating little air pockets. And the more you do it, the lighter it gets. It gets this kind of whipped texture. And that is desired in a cake where you want lots of air. It expands in the oven, and you have this sort of bouncy, soft, cakey texture. Melted butter is not going to do that. It is a liquid. Melted butter will lead to a denser end result. So like in a cake that I want to be light and fluffy, I will use room temperature butter. In a recipe where I don't actually want a cakey texture, like in my chocolate chip cookies, I'll use melted, because you get something that is generally like a little chewier. I mean, of course, it depends on the other elements of the recipe, but if a recipe calls for room temperature butter and starts with creaming, you generally do not want to substitute melted butter. Just whatever the recipe says, I would stick to that. Caitlin's question is, I always hear about under and overproofing, but never any explanations as to what that means or the signs of either. What should I look for in my breads to know they're proofed just right? So often it'll be like proof until doubled in size or whatever. But sometimes I'm like, I don't know, does it look doubled? I think it does, but it's not sort of hard to tell. So unfortunately, I mean, one thing you can do is get this is something you'll see in bakeries, like a square-shaped container that's graduated, meaning it has like marks on it for volume measurements. And you can really like see, oh, it's gone from 1 liter to 2 liters, it's now doubled. There's also like a distinction to be made between something doing its bulk fermentation or its first rise, and then proofing, which is after something is shaped and formed and then is left to rise a second time. With that stage, which we call proofing, at least in bread making, there actually is a really good indicator, and that is where you poke your finger into this, whatever's proofing, this loaf, this, dough, whatever, and it should feel very airy. It should be like you're pressing on a balloon, and when you remove your finger, the dough should spring back slowly and leave a slight impression from your finger. And that is a sign that it's filled with gas and that the dough is relaxed enough that it can rise and grow in the oven. Basically, proofing is like a process where you are letting the yeast create gases that are aerating the bread and lightening it, or the dough, or whatever you're making. If you're underproofing it, you are not enough of those gases are being created where when you put it in the oven, it's not really going to grow in size. It's going to turn out really dense, and it's just going to be like an underdeveloped, sad loaf, bun, whatever. Overproofing sort of leads to the same end result, but it happens very differently. So in overproofing, you've let it go too long. Too many gases have built up. You have these very large air bubbles that when they go into the oven, the bubbles pop, and you end up having something that rises really tall at the beginning, but then falls back down. And then you end up with something that is still dense and like hard, and not airy like you want it to be. So it's sort of like, that's why it's a little bit hard to tell. Sometimes it could be like, someone says, I don't know why my thing turned out really dense. I'm like, well, you could have underproofed it or overproofed it. They both kind of result in a similar outcome, but you don't want to do either. Okay, Mike says, what's your go-to recipe when asked to bring dessert to a party? Great question. Often it's the thing that I'm testing because I want like a 2-for-1. So it's like you people are going to get a half-developed cake or a, third test on a pie or whatever. That said, I do like to tailor what I'm making to the tastes of the host or wherever I'm going. So it changes. I do have some like go-to ones. I really do like making the chocolate wave cake, flourless chocolate wave cake from Dessert Person, because it fits with a lot of dietary restrictions. And so many people love chocolate desserts. So that's a really good one. Truculent Quackery asks, how do you remain so delightful? It's hard. A lot of iced coffee. You really brighten up my day, Claire, even as your YouTube career has evolved over time. Thank you. That's very kind. I complain a lot to Vinny behind the scenes, and then I can save all the positive energy for in front of the camera.
That's actually my fake username.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. You're like, that Vince behind the camera seems so great. I watch a lot of mindless television. I feel like that helps a lot. A lot of Bravo, a lot of Housewives. It just helps to decompress. But I don't know. I just think like, what's the alternative to having a positive attitude? Nothing. It's just like the only option. What are you going to do? But thank you for the very kind question. And thanks to everyone for writing in their questions. I really appreciate that you took this seriously and really wanted to learn more about baking, and I'm always happy to answer questions to the best of my knowledge or ability. Like, I have a little bit of homework. I'm gonna look into some high altitude stuff, some egg replacement facts and tips. So it helps me to keep learning, which I really love because I don't like that feeling of being stuck. And also one of the reasons why I love baking, because I'll never know everything there is to know about baking. And that's kind of a beautiful thing. So thank you. Thank you. I didn't have to make a recipe today. I only have to run my dishwasher once today. That's a gift. I really appreciate it. And I really hope we do more of these Claire-ified episodes. So thank you, and like and subscribe. Yay.